Your face is doing something right now that no other animal on Earth does quite like you do. Not a growl, not a display, not a chemical signal. Just water running down your cheek. And the strangest part? It makes you temporarily blind. Think about that for a second. You're blurring your own vision, broadcasting your exact emotional state to everyone in the room, and making yourself physically easier to approach or attack. From a pure survival standpoint, this looks like a catastrophic design flaw. Evolution has had hundreds of millions of years to sort out bad ideas, and it is ruthless about cutting anything that doesn't pull its weight. So why is crying still here? That's the question. Not just why do we cry in the soft greeting card sense, but why, in a world where weakness gets you eaten, did the most socially complex animal on the planet keep a behavior that announces, "I am not okay right now. Come find me"? Here's what makes it even stranger. Crying isn't one thing. Your eyes water when you chop an onion, and they water when someone you love dies. And your body uses the word tears for both. But those two events are almost nothing alike. One is a chemical alarm system. The other is something much harder to explain. Biochemist William Frey, working in the 1980s, was one of the first researchers to actually analyze the chemical composition of different kinds of tears, and found that emotional tears contain stress hormones and protein compounds that reflex tears simply don't. The body is doing something different, specifically, deliberately different. Which raises the obvious question, why would it bother? Because building a separate biochemical system is expensive. Evolution doesn't spend resources on expensive things without a reason. And the reason, it turns out, reaches much further back than you'd expect. All the way to the most helpless version of you that ever existed, screaming in the dark, completely dependent on someone else to survive. But before we get there, here's the thing that stopped me cold when I first looked into this. The best current explanation for why you cry as an adult has almost nothing to do with sadness. It has to do with the reason human groups didn't fall apart. Well, get there. But first, not all tears are even the same thing. So tears aren't tears, not really. Your body runs 3 completely separate tear operations, and only one of them has anything to do with emotion. The first kind, basal tears, are just maintenance. Your eyes are producing them right now, a slow, continuous film that keeps the surface of your eye from drying out and cracking. You never notice them. They're the janitorial staff, quiet, essential, completely invisible until something goes wrong. The second kind are reflex tears. Chop an onion, walk into smoke, get poked in the eye, your lacrimal glands fire immediately, flooding the eye to flush out whatever chemical or physical irritant just showed up uninvited. This is a defensive system. Fast, local, automatic. Your brain barely participates. It's closer to a sneeze than a feeling. And then there's the third kind, the one nobody has a clean explanation for. Emotional tears. The ones that show up when someone you love dies, or when you watch a film you've seen 4 times and it still gets you at the same moment, or when you finally hear back that the test came back clear. These tears aren't flushing anything out. There's no irritant. Your eye isn't in danger. And yet the body commits, full production, the works, sometimes running down your face in a way that is genuinely difficult to hide. Here's where it gets strange. William Frey, a biochemist at the St. Paul Ramsey Medical Center in Minnesota, spent years in the 1980s actually analyzing what emotional tears are made of, and found they contain measurably higher concentrations of stress hormones, including prolactin and adrenocorticotropic hormone, than the other 2 types. Your body is packaging something into these tears, something it apparently wants out, which is either deeply purposeful or a very elaborate accident. One idea, and it's genuinely contested, is that emotional crying may help the body offload stress chemistry, a pressure release valve essentially. It would explain why a good cry often leaves people feeling wrung out but calmer, even when nothing about the situation has actually changed. The problem is solved on 0 levels. And yet, something shifted. But here's the part that doesn't fit neatly into the pressure valve theory. If emotional tears were just about internal chemistry, why are they visible? Why do they run down your face instead of just draining quietly through your tear ducts the way most tears do? Why does the body make this particular process so legible to other people? That question points somewhere much older than stress hormones. It points to the first humans who needed crying to work, not for themselves, but for whoever was watching. Picture a human infant, not a foal that stands within an hour, not a wildebeest calf that runs on day 1. A human baby, which arrives on Earth so catastrophically unfinished that it cannot hold its own head up for months, cannot walk for roughly a year, and remains genuinely dependent on other people for somewhere between 5 and 10 years before it can do much of anything useful on its own. By mammal standards, this is almost embarrassing. And yet, here we all are. The reason human infants are born so helpless comes down to a brutal geometric problem. Our brains got enormous faster than our pelvises could widen, so we started being born earlier in development than our primate relatives, still half-baked, still deeply unfinished. This is called the obstetric dilemma, and it means that from the moment you arrived, you were in a kind of permanent emergency. No claws, no fur, no ability to regulate your own temperature, no way to find food, signal danger, or move towards safety. You had exactly one tool, a cry that was physically impossible to ignore. And this matters more than it sounds, because a human infant's cry isn't just loud. It's specifically, almost surgically tuned to trigger distress in adult caregivers. Research has shown that the sound of an infant crying activates the brain's threat response systems in adults, even when those adults have no connection to the child. Strangers, people who've never met the baby. The cry reaches in and pulls something. Now put that baby somewhere cold. It's roughly 40,000 years ago, a small group camped in a shallow rock shelter, and a mother has set her infant down to gather wood. The baby wakes. It's cold, it's hungry, and it has no idea where she went. It cannot call her name. It cannot crawl to find her. It has one move. And that cry, that specific, escalating, impossible to tune out sound, is what kept your ancestors alive long enough to become your ancestors. Not metaphorically, literally. The infants whose cries pulled caregivers back fast enough survived. The ones whose signals were too weak, too easy to ignore, didn't. Over thousands of generations, that pressure shaped the signal into something almost engineered. Crying in infancy isn't weakness. It's the oldest emergency broadcast system on the planet. And it worked. But here's the thing nobody really explains. That system was built for babies. Helpless, pre-verbal, completely dependent babies who needed someone to come running. So why, when you're 34 years old and you get devastating news, does your body reach for the exact same tool? That shouldn't still be happening. And the fact that it is tells you something important about what crying actually became. Evolution doesn't send newsletters. It doesn't announce when it's repurposing something. It just quietly lets a useful system expand into new territory, and by the time anyone notices, it's been running that way for tens of thousands of years. The infant distress system didn't switch off when you learned to walk. It didn't retire when you got your first job, or when you became someone that other people depend on. It's still in there. The same ancient circuitry, the same lacrimal glands, the same cascade of neurological signals that once pulled a caregiver across a cold campsite. It just got pointed at bigger, more complicated problems. Think about what actually makes adults cry. Pain, yes, but also grief that has no solution. Frustration that's been compressed for too long and finally finds an exit. The specific overwhelm of watching someone you love suffer and being completely unable to fix it. Relief so sudden It has nowhere to go but out. Reunion after a long absence. A piece of music that catches you off guard at the exact wrong moment in the exact right way. None of those are infant problems. They're the problems of a social creature navigating a world of enormous emotional complexity, with a brain that tracks relationships, obligations, loss, and meaning across decades. The distress system didn't disappear, it scaled. I didn't fully believe this until I sat with it for a while. The person crying at a graveside and the baby screaming in the dark are running the same core program. The inputs are completely different. The underlying signal is not. Researchers think what happened, and this is genuinely contested, so take it as a working hypothesis, is that as human social life grew more intricate, emotional display itself became valuable in ways it hadn't been before. Showing distress to the right person at the right moment could get you help, repair a rupture, or communicate something that words hadn't yet evolved to carry. The system got recruited for a new job. Same hardware, vastly expanded software. If this is the kind of thing that gets you, drop a like, leave a comment. It genuinely helps. Anyway, there's a specific kind of adult cry that I think about here, the one that happens after the crisis is over. Not during the emergency, you hold it together during the emergency, but the moment you finally sit down afterward, when your hands are shaking slightly and your body just starts. That delayed release isn't weakness or irrationality. It's the system doing exactly what it was built to do, just on a schedule your conscious mind didn't plan. The question is, what does that signal do to the people who witness it? Because that, it turns out, is where the real story lives. Here's what tears do to the person watching. Two people are in an argument. Voices have been raised. The air in the room has that particular tension where one more wrong word tips everything over. And then, one of them starts to cry. Not performed, not strategic, just the body doing what it does when the pressure gets high enough. And something shifts. The other person's posture changes. The volume drops. The argument doesn't necessarily resolve, but the temperature does. You've probably been in that room, on one side of it or the other. What just happened there isn't weakness winning the argument. It's something more specific. Researchers studying conflict and emotional signaling think that visible tears may function as what's sometimes called an honest signal, a physical display that's genuinely costly and difficult to fake on demand, which makes it credible in a way that words alone often aren't. You can say, "I'm really upset about this." You can modulate your voice, choose careful language, frame things diplomatically, but you can't easily manufacture tears on cue in the middle of a real argument. The body has to actually be in a state to produce them. And that involuntary quality is precisely the point. When someone sees tears, the brain reads them as unmanaged, as something that leaked through rather than something performed. And that triggers a different response than a verbal claim would. Studies using functional MRI have shown that viewing images of crying faces activates empathy-related regions in observers' brains more strongly than neutral or even angry faces. The signal lands differently because it reads as real. This is the honest signal hypothesis, and it reframes something you've probably been taught to think of as a liability. Vulnerability, made visible and involuntary, can actually be socially protective. Not always, not in every context, but often enough that the behavior survived. Think about the last time someone you cared about cried in front of you. Not on a screen, in the room, in real life. The instinct that moved through you wasn't contempt. It was something closer to the pull of a hand reaching toward a shoulder. That response is old. It's the same pull that brought a caregiver back across a dark campsite. The trigger changed, the response didn't. Crying can also do something even more specific. It can stop aggression. Not always, not reliably, but there's evidence that visible distress signals in social animals, including humans, can interrupt escalating conflict by reframing the interaction. The opponent stops being an opponent and becomes something more complicated. But here's the part that genuinely unsettled me when I looked into it. Humans may not be alone in using distress signals socially. They're just unusually visible about it. And the comparison with other animals breaks open in a direction nobody quite expects. Other animals grieve. That much is not in dispute. Elephants have been documented returning to the bones of dead herd members, touching the skulls with their trunks, standing in something that looks, from the outside, unmistakably like attendance. Chimpanzees carry dead infants for days. Crows hold what researchers cautiously describe as funeral gatherings around their dead, congregating, going quiet, then dispersing. Dolphins have been observed supporting deceased calves at the water's surface long after it could do any good. The distress is real. The social response to loss is real. The behavior is not nothing. But here's where the comparison gets interesting. As far as researchers can tell, the visible tear as social signal, the thing running down your face that other members of your group can see and respond to from across a room, appears to be unusually pronounced in humans. Most mammals produce tears for lubrication and reflex purposes. Emotional crying that generates visible, flowing tears as a legible social display? That seems to be something humans do in a way that stands out. The honest answer is, we don't fully know why, and anyone who tells you otherwise is working well ahead of the evidence. What researchers can say is this: human faces are unusually expressive, human social groups are unusually large and complex, and the distance across which humans need to communicate emotional states is unusually wide. A chimpanzee in distress vocalizes, touches, presents submissive postures. All of that works fine at close range, in small groups, where physical contact is possible. But humans built societies of strangers, hundreds of people, then thousands, living in proximity, needing to read each other's states quickly and from a distance. A tear running down a face is legible at 10 meters. A subtle postural shift is not. It may be, and this is speculation worth holding lightly, that the visibility of human emotional tears is part of what made large-scale human cooperation possible. Not the whole story, not even close to the whole story, but a piece of it. The signal scaled with the group size. There's something quietly strange about that idea. Every other animal on this list communicates distress through sound, through touch, through proximity. Humans added a visual channel, one that works across distance, in silence, in the middle of a crowd, and then built entire cultural systems around responding to it. Funerals, weddings, the specific social permission we grant people who are visibly crying to be held, excused, approached. We built rituals around the signal, which means the signal was important enough to organize around. And that brings us to the thing that started this whole question, the paradox that made no sense at the beginning. If crying makes you vulnerable, why did it survive? The answer, it turns out, was hiding in plain sight the whole time. Weakness was never the point. The story we tell about survival, the one where the toughest, hardest, most self-sufficient individual wins, is missing something. It's missing the fact that humans are not, by any reasonable physical measure, impressive animals. You're slow. You're fragile. You have no natural armor, no venom, no particularly devastating bite. A wolf, a bear, a large cat, any of them would end you without much effort, one-on-one, in the open. And yet here you are, 8 billion of you. The thing that made humans dangerous wasn't individual toughness. It was group coherence, the ability to stay coordinated, stay connected, stay responsive to each other's states across time and distance and stress. To notice when someone in the group was in distress and move toward them rather than away. To repair ruptures instead of letting them fracture the group permanently. To remain, against all the centrifugal forces of hardship and conflict and loss, bound to each other. Crying may be one of the oldest tools that held that together. Not crying as weakness, crying as signal. As the body's way of saying, without words, without strategy, Without the possibility of easy fakery, I am not okay, and I need the group to know. And the group, wired by the same ancient circuitry, responds. The hand moves toward the shoulder. The voice drops. The aggression pauses. The distance closes. That single tear running down a face in the dark, the one that started all of this, isn't a malfunction. It's a dispatch, sent from one nervous system to another, carrying information that language hadn't yet evolved to hold, readable across a fire, across a room, across the specific silence that falls when something has gone badly wrong. The paradox we started with, crying makes you blind, it flags your weakness, it seems like exactly the wrong move, dissolves when you zoom out far enough. Because the vulnerability wasn't the problem. The vulnerability was the message, and the message, received by the right person at the right moment, was what kept the group intact. Humans didn't survive because they were the hardest animals on the savannah. They survived because they were the ones who could fall apart in front of each other and still be held. So the next time your vision blurs, at a funeral, at a reunion, in the car after a day that finally broke through the composure you'd been holding all week, your body isn't failing you. It's doing something ancient and precise. It's reaching across whatever distance exists between you and the people around you, with the oldest signal your species has, and asking to be found. It worked 40,000 years ago in the dark. It's still working now.